Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku survived as a weapon in Weapon X project. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain fell on Yokohama not as a cleansing shower, but as a dirty, persistent drizzle that smeared the neon glow of the cityscape across the black asphalt. It was a shroud, turning the towering monoliths of steel and glass into weeping specters. On the 77th floor of the Okumo Tower, the rain was a percussive whisper against the panoramic windows, a sound too soft to be heard over the expensive sound system piping minimalist jazz into the penthouse suite. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone, aged whiskey, and fear. Kenji the Viper Tanaka, Oyabun of the Inagawakai's most profitable smuggling ring, held his glass with a hand that did not tremble. To the outside observer, he was the picture of calm. To the two men standing guard before him, he was a coiled spring. His quirk, synaptic overload, was a subtle and terrifying thing. A single touch was all it took to send a person's nervous system into a seizure-like cascade of misfires, effectively paralyzing them in a prison of their own screaming neurons. It was why he was untouchable. It was why he was confident. Report. Tanaka's voice was a low hiss, cutting through the music. The man on the left, a mountain of flesh and granite-like skin named Kenta, rumbled. Outer perimeter is secure, Oyabun. No alarms tripped. The static field is active on all entry points. No one gets in without us knowing. His quirk, Aegis Skin, was simple and brutally effective. He was a living wall. The second man, lean and twitchy, was named Ryo. Sparks of blue electricity danced over his knuckles. Daiki's field covers the entire floor, Tanaka-sama. Even a fly would cause a ripple, and my quills are ready. Ryo's quirk, Porcupine, allowed him to fire hardened keratin spikes from his arms with the speed of bullets. He was their artillery. Tanaka took a slow sip of his whiskey. He had one more man, Daiki, the source of the protective static field, stationed in the communications room, ensuring their electronic security was as absolute as their physical. They were the best security money could buy. Necessary, given the data he'd acquired. Information on an organization that made the Hero Public Safety Commission look like a neighborhood watch. A ghost entity that dealt in assets, not people. They called themselves the Consortium, and Tanaka had made the fatal mistake of trying to blackmail them. Their response had been simple and chilling, a single, encrypted message that read, Asset dispatched. Expect collection. That was 3 hours ago. Tanaka was beginning to think they had bluffed. Arrogance was a comforting warmth. Outside, clinging to the slick, rain-lashed glass 77 stories above the street, the asset in question made its final approach. It had no name. It had a designation, Weapon Delta. It had no thoughts, only processes. Its mind was a silent, churning engine of data, constantly updating, analyzing, and calculating. Environmental scan, rain density moderate. Wind speed 18 knots, gusting to 25. Surface integrity, compromised by moisture. Grip adjustment required, 12% pressure. Delta's hands and feet, clad in a matte black tactical material that clung like a second skin, were anchored to the building by specialized suction grip technology. It was a slow, painstaking climb, but silence was paramount. The mission parameters were explicit: infiltrate. Eliminate the primary target, Kenji Tanaka. Neutralize all hostile combatants. Retrieve or destroy all sensitive data. Exfiltrate. No witnesses. Reaching the level of the penthouse, Delta moved horizontally, a spider on a glass web. It saw the figures inside, backlit and oblivious. The tactical overlay in its vision tagged them instantly. Target ID Bodyguard 1 Kenta. Quirk Class Mutation. Ability Epidermal Hardening. Threat Level 610 Close Quarters. Vulnerabilities: Respiratory System, Joints, Ocular Region. Slower Movement Speed. Target ID Bodyguard 2 Ryo. Quirk Class Emitter. Ability Projectile Generation, Keratin-based. Threat Level 710 Ranged. Vulnerabilities: Limited ammunition, reload time post-volley. Close quarters combat ineffective against reinforced targets. Target ID Primary, Kenji Tanaka. Quirk Class Emitter. Ability, Bioelectric Contact Paralysis. Threat Level, 910 Direct Contact. Vulnerabilities, requires physical touch. Ineffective at range. There was a fourth signature, Fainter, in an adjacent room. Target ID Bodyguard 3 Daiki. Quirk Class Emitter. Ability, Area of Effect Bioelectric Field. Threat Level, 510 Support. Vulnerabilities, Stationary. Source of Electronic Interference. Priority Subtarget. The plan formulated itself in a nanosecond. The support needed to be eliminated first. Silent entry was no longer viable. The static field would announce its presence. Therefore, the entry had to be loud, disorienting, and total. Delta crawled to the corner of the building, braced itself, and with a surge of impossible strength, kicked. Its leg was not just flesh and bone. Laced through every single bone in its body, from its phalanges to its skull, was a near indestructible alloy of adamantium. The enhancement gave its frame an unnatural density, and its strikes an unstoppable momentum. The reinforced, soundproofed window didn't just crack, it exploded inward. The sound of the implosion was like a thunderclap inside the penthouse. Shards of glass, transformed into a storm of crystalline shrapnel, blasted into the room. The minimalist jazz cut out abruptly. For a moment, the occupants were frozen in shock. Through the gaping, rain-swept hole in the side of their fortress stepped a figure. It was not large or physically imposing in the way Kenta was. It was of average height, clad in black, its face obscured by a featureless mask with dull red optical sensors. It moved with a liquid grace that seemed to defy its own solid presence. Ryo reacted first, a snarl twisting his lips. Intruder! His arms blurred. A volley of a dozen white spikes shot across the room. Delta did not dodge. It simply raised its left forearm. The spikes impacted with a series of sharp pangs, as if hitting solid steel. They shattered, their fragments clattering uselessly to the marble floor. Analysis: keratin projectiles lack density to penetrate subdermal plating. Threat level downgraded. In the fraction of a second Ryo was stunned by this impossibility. Delta moved. It crossed the 10 meters between them in a blink. Its movement was an exercise in brutal economy. No wasted steps, no flourishing motions. It was a straight line of lethal intent. Kenta lumbered forward, a roar building in his throat, trying to intercept. Get away from him! Strategy: bypass heavy target. Eliminate range threat first. Delta slid low, the floor slick with rainwater. Its body moved under Kenta's clumsy grab, the bigger man's momentum carrying him past. Delta rose, its right hand striking Ryo's extended arm not as a punch, but as a precision tool. There was a wet, sickening crack of bone. Ryo screamed, a high, thin sound of agony as his arm bent at an angle nature never intended. Before the scream could end, Delta's other hand shot out, fingers stiff, and jabbed into the soft tissue of his throat. Ryo's eyes went wide, and he collapsed, choking, his one remaining offensive weapon silenced. From the communications room, Daiki shouted, He's in! Tanaka-sama, get back! Sub-target located. Delta ignored the charging Kenta and pivoted. It scooped a shard of fallen glass from the floor, its fingers closing around the razor-sharp edge without effect. With a flick of its wrist, it threw the shard. The piece of glass flew with inhuman accuracy, spinning like a shuriken, and embedded itself in the throat of the man who had just appeared in the doorway of the side room. Daiki gurgled, clutching at his neck, the static field that permeated the room dying with him in a shower of fading blue sparks. 2 hostiles neutralized in 3 seconds. Now, only the wall remained. Kenta was pure rage. He saw his comrades fall and charged, his footsteps shaking the floor. He threw a punch that could shatter concrete. Delta met the punch. Not with a block, but with its own body. It turned, taking the full force of the blow on its shoulder. The sound was deafening, a deep, resonant gong of flesh and rock meeting unbreakable metal. Kenta howled in pain, shaking his hand, his stone-like knuckles fractured and bleeding. He had just punched a mountain. Analysis: opponent's offensive capability compromised. Exploiting structural weakness. Delta's counterattack was immediate. It wasn't about power against power. It was about physics. It ducked under Kenta's follow-up swing, its hand shooting out to grab the back of the bigger man's knee. It hooked its foot behind Kenta's other ankle and pulled. The giant, for all his strength and durability, was subject to the laws of leverage. He stumbled, his balance gone. As he fell backwards, Delta was already moving. It drove its elbow, a sharpened point of adamantium-laced bone, directly into the side of Kenta's knee joint. The joint was the weakest point in his stony armor. The impact wasn't a crack, it was a detonation of cartilage and ligament. Kenta's leg gave out completely. He crashed to the floor, his 400-pound frame making the whole room shudder. He was incapacitated, roaring in agony, but no longer a threat. The entire brutal ballet had taken less than 5 seconds. The penthouse was silent again, save for the whisper of the rain and the pained groans of the fallen. Delta stood over the wreckage, its head slowly turning towards the last man standing. Kenji Tanaka had not moved. His face was a mask of disbelief and stark terror. The whiskey glass had slipped from his fingers, its contents staining the pristine white rug. He saw the bodies of his elite guard, men with quirks that had defeated heroes, dismantled and broken as if they were children's toys. He looked at the masked figure, at the red optical sensors that seemed to stare right through him, and saw not a man, but an inevitability. What are you? Tanaka breathed, his voice trembling. Delta did not respond. It took a single step forward. Its internal monologue was a cold, flat river of text. Primary target cornered. Quirk requires contact. Maintain distance. Optimal takedown, projectile incapacitation. Tanaka's survival instincts finally screamed past his shock. He fumbled inside his jacket, pulling out a small, ornate pistol. He fired. The gun shot a pathetic pop in the cavernous room. The bullet struck Delta square in the center of its chest. The impact threw it back a half step. There was a faint metallic tink. The bullet, flattened, dropped to the floor. Delta's tactical suit showed a small tear, but beneath it, there was no blood. No wound. Its adamantium ribcage had treated the bullet like a pebble. It took another step forward. Tanaka fired again. And again. Chest. Shoulder. Leg. Each bullet met with the same result, winding off the unbreakable skeleton beneath the flesh. He clicked on an empty chamber. The gun fell from his numb fingers. Desperation gave way to a chilling realization. This thing wasn't a person with a quirk. It was something else entirely. It was a monster wearing human skin. Stay back! Tanaka shrieked, holding his hands out, his only remaining weapon. One touch! That's all it takes. Delta stopped. It tilted its head, a gesture that might have been curiosity in a human. Threat is reliant on proximity. Eliminating proximity advantage. Its eyes scanned the room. It saw the heavy, crystal decanter of whiskey on the bar. Without looking away from Tanaka, its hand darted out and picked up a long, thin, silver letter opener from a nearby desk. It held the object pinched between its thumb and forefinger, weighing it. Projectile mass, 112 grams. Material, sterling silver. Optimal velocity, 85 meters per second. Target, median nerve, right wrist. Tanaka saw the motion and his eyes widened. He thought it was going to throw the letter opener. He braced himself. He was wrong. Delta wasn't aiming at him. With a flick of its wrist, it threw the letter opener at the crystal decanter 10 feet away. The silver point struck the heavy crystal, and it exploded. A spray of whiskey and glittering shards filled the air. One large, jagged piece of crystal flew directly towards Tanaka. Instinctively, Tanaka flinched and raised his right arm to protect his face. Target locked. The moment his arm was raised and stationary, Delta moved. It had already closed half the distance. Its own hand shot forward, not with the letter opener, but with a simple, black fountain pen it had plucked from the same desk. It threw the pen underhand, a smooth, precise motion. The pen flew, a black streak against the chaotic background. It was not a lethal attack. It was surgical. The sharpened nib of the pen, propelled with terrifying force, struck the back of Tanaka's exposed hand, piercing skin and sinew and pinning his hand to the wooden frame of the doorway behind him. Tanaka screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure agony. His hand was impaled. He was trapped. His quirk, his ultimate defense, was rendered useless, his hand nailed to the wall. Delta closed the remaining distance. It stood before the terrified, whimpering Yakuza boss. Its red optics seemed to dim as it looked down at him. Its mission was almost complete. Eliminate the primary target. Its hand came up, fingers extended and rigid. It was aiming for his throat. A quick, clean, and efficient termination, and then, its gaze shifted. To its left, on a small end table knocked over during the fight, lay a child's drawing. Crayon scrawls of a happy family. Next to it, half hidden under a lampshade, was an action figure. It was in All Might. A classic Silver Age model, fists on his hips, a permanent, beaming smile carved into the plastic. He wore his iconic red, white, and blue costume, a symbol known across the entire world. A symbol of peace, of hope, of heroism. The sight of it did something to Delta's internal systems. Visual data input. Unidentified anomaly detected. For 0.8 seconds, the stream of tactical data, the constant analysis, the mission parameters, it all stopped. The cold, logical machine in its head went silent. And in that silence, a ghost stirred. A flash. Not a memory, but a phantom sensation. The smell of dust and ozone from an old computer monitor. The bright, warm glow of a screen illuminating a dark room. The sound of a booming, infectious laugh from cheap speakers. A feeling, a warmth in its chest. A forgotten, impossible feeling of joy. The image was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind a confusing echo. The tactical overlay flickered back to life, data scrolling rapidly as the system tried to correct the error. System error. Corrupted data fragment detected. Purging. Purge failed. Isolating fragment. Isolation failed. Recalibrating. A phantom ache bloomed in its chest, sharp and unfamiliar. It was not pain. It was something else. An echo of a wound that had no physical source. For the first time in what might have been years, or a lifetime, Weapon Delta felt a sliver of confusion. Its hesitation was minuscule, a mere second in the grand scheme of the mission. But it was a second that had never happened before. It looked back at Tanaka, who was staring, wild-eyed, at the All Might figure and then back at the masked killer. The moment was gone. The machine reasserted control. Delta's hand completed its journey, striking Tanaka's throat. The crack of breaking cartilage was soft, almost anticlimactic. Kenji Tanaka slumped forward, pinned to the wall by a fountain pen, life fading from his eyes. Primary target eliminated. Delta stood motionless for a moment, the rain and wind whipping through the shattered window. It performed a post-mission sweep, its gaze clinical and detached once more. It located Tanaka's computer, the source of the data. A small thermal charge was placed on the hard drive. A soft whump and a puff of smoke, and the data was gone. Mission complete. It activated its encrypted comms unit, a small device behind its ear. The channel hissed to life. Control, this is Delta. Mission accomplished. Target eliminated. Data neutralized. Exfiltrating now. Its voice was a monotone, synthetically altered and devoid of any inflection. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a woman's voice, crisp and cold as Arctic ice, replied. Acknowledge, Delta. Your performance was adequate. Delta said nothing. It was not programmed to respond to performance reviews. However, Control continued, her voice laced with a subtle edge of displeasure. We registered a 0.8-second delay in target termination after all hostiles were neutralized. There was also a corresponding spike in your neural activity, inconsistent with standard combat operations. Report. What caused the deviation? Delta's processors worked, accessing the log of the event. The All Might figure. The data fragment. The phantom sensation. Its programming provided the correct response. A minor distraction in the environment. Control. A non-standard visual stimulus. It is logged and will be filtered in future engagements. It will not happen again. It was the truth, but a sterile, incomplete version of it. There was another pause. Control was likely cross-referencing its report with the telemetry she had received. See that it does not. Deviations are the first step toward malfunction, and we do not tolerate malfunctioning equipment. A new assignment has been uploaded to your tactical interface. A potential threat has emerged, disrupting consortium operations in the Musutifu sector. The target is an information broker who has grown too bold. The name of the city was just data. A set of coordinates. A geographical location. It meant nothing. New mission received. Location: Musutifu, Japan. Target: gentle criminal. Objective: elimination and data seizure. Understood, Control. Delta replied. Your transport is en route to the designated extraction point. Be there in 15 minutes. Control out. The channel went dead. Delta turned and walked back toward the shattered window, its boots making no sound on the glass-strewn floor. It did not look back at the carnage. It did not look back at the broken bodies of the guards, or the dead Yakuza boss, or the small, smiling plastic hero on the floor. It was a tool. A weapon. And it had been given a new target. As it prepared to rappel down the side of the skyscraper into the stormy darkness, the phantom ache in its chest pulsed one last time. The system flagged it as an unscheduled muscular contraction and dismissed it. But the isolated data fragment remained, a tiny seed of corruption buried deep within the machine's perfect programming. A ghost in the shell waiting. A booming laugh. A bright screen. Hope. The weapon dismissed the corrupted data and stepped out into the rain, a ghost falling from the sky, on a direct course for a home it could not remember and a past that was about to collide with its present. The city of Musutifu, the heart of Japan's hero society, was about to receive a visitor it was not prepared for. And he, in turn, was not prepared for it. The interior of the Kestrel VTOL was a sterile womb of gunmetal gray. There were no windows. The only light came from thin LED strips that cast a cold, clinical glow on the polished surfaces. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and antiseptic, a dead, flat taste that clung to the back of the throat. Weapon Delta sat perfectly still on a hard, magnetic lock bench, his back ramrod straight, his hands resting on his knees. He was not resting. He was in low-power standby mode, his biological functions regulated to conserve energy, his mind a quiet hum of idling processors. The journey from Yokohama to Musutifu was a 90-minute flight. To Delta, it was a sequence of 5,400 seconds, each one logged and accounted for. The low thrum of the stealth engines was a constant, predictable vibration. The slight shifts in pressure as the aircraft adjusted its altitude were registered and dismissed. It was all just data. Then, a sudden jolt of turbulence shook the craft, a brief, violent shudder as it passed through a pocket of unstable air. The magnetic locks holding Delta to the bench whined as they compensated. The physical shock was negligible. But the unexpected sensory input was a key turning a lock deep within his corrupted mind. The jolt, the momentary feeling of being thrown and caught, acted as a catalyst. The gray walls of the Kestrel dissolved. Error, unscheduled memory recall initiated. Source, vestigial emotional trauma. Attempting to suppress. Suppression failed, and he was no longer Delta. He was 14 years old, and the world was ending. The sky over Musutifu was a brilliant, unforgiving blue, a stark contrast to the gray sludge caking his school uniform. The underpass was cool and dark, smelling of damp concrete and neglect. Izuku Midoriya walked with his head down, each step a leaden weight. The straps of his yellow backpack dug into his shoulders. Heavy with books he no longer had the heart to open. His hero analysis for the future, number 13, was a charred, soggy ruin inside, its pages fused together by Bakugo's casual cruelty. But that wasn't the source of the hollow abyss that had opened in his chest. The true damage had been done just moments ago, on a rooftop, by the skeletal, broken form of his idol. It's not bad to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid. All Might's words echoed in his skull, not with booming heroism, but with the quiet, final finality of a judge's gavel. He had asked the question he had held in his heart his entire life, the secret, desperate prayer of the quirkless. Can I be a hero too? And the symbol of peace himself had answered. No, he stumbled, catching himself against the graffiti-stained wall. A tear, hot and thick with shame, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It was over. The dream that had been the central pillar of his existence, the only thing that gave him the strength to endure the taunts, the burns, the pitying looks, it had been vaporized. He was just a Deku, a useless, quirkless Deku. He felt empty. A fragile shell, the contents scooped out and discarded. What was he supposed to do now? What could he possibly become? He was a broken part in a world of superpowers, a faulty product of genetics. A white, windowless van pulled up to the curb beside him, its tires hissing softly on the pavement. Izuku barely noticed it. His world had shrunk to the cracks in the sidewalk. The side door slid open with a quiet, pneumatic sigh. "Izuku Midoriya?" a voice asked. It was calm, professional. Not threatening. Izuku looked up, startled. Two men in simple, gray overalls stood there. They had no discerning features. They were aggressively average, the kind of faces you'd forget the moment you looked away. "Why, yes?" he stammered, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "There's been an incident involving your mother," the first man said, his expression one of practiced sympathy. "We're from the Municipal Crisis Response Unit. We need you to come with us." Panic, sharp and cold, pierced through Izuku's fog of despair. "My mom! Is she okay? What happened?" "She's stable," the second man said, stepping out of the van. "There was a minor villain incident near your apartment complex. She was caught in the vicinity. We'll explain everything on the way to the hospital." It all made a terrifying sort of sense. In a world of daily villain attacks, this was a plausible, horrifying reality. Izuku's analytical mind, even in its grief, didn't register any red flags. They knew his name. They looked official. His fear for his mother overrode everything else. "Okay." He nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Okay, I'm coming." He moved to get into the van. The second man put a gentle hand on his shoulder to guide him in. The moment his fingers made contact, Izuku felt a strange, tingling numbness spread from the point of contact. It wasn't painful. It was just an erasure of sensation. His legs suddenly felt like water. His vision started to swim. What?" he slurred, looking up at the man's impassive face. The man's other hand came up, holding a white cloth. A sweet, cloying smell, like almonds and ether, filled Izuku's senses. He tried to struggle, to scream, but his muscles wouldn't obey. His limbs were heavy, disconnected things. The cloth was pressed over his nose and mouth. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the first man picking up his charred notebook from where he'd dropped it on the ground. The man flipped through the soggy pages with a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was interest. Like a scientist who had just found a promising specimen. Memory fragment quarantined. Categorized as origin point trauma. System stability at 98.7%. Resuming operational awareness. The interior of the Kestrel solidified around Delta once more. He had not moved. His heart rate had elevated by a mere 6 beats per minute during the recall. His programming was efficient. It treated the memory not as a part of him, but as a foreign virus to be contained. A holographic display shimmered to life in the air before him. The face of Control appeared, her features sharp and severe, her dark hair pulled back in a tight, merciless bun. Her eyes were chips of obsidian. It was a pre-recorded briefing, but her gaze felt as if it could pierce through time and space to scrutinize him. "Weapon Delta." Her voice was the same clipped, arctic tone from the comms. "Your new target is an individual operating under the alias Gentle Criminal. Real name, Danjuro Tabita, a failed hero aspirant turned online provocateur and petty thief. His quirk, elasticity, allows him to bestow elastic properties upon anything he touches, including the air itself." Video footage played beside her holographic head. It showed a man with dramatic white hair and a mustache, dressed like a 19th century dandy, bouncing off invisible trampolines of air to steal from a convenience store. It was absurd. Pathetic. Ordinarily, this level of nuisance would not warrant your deployment. Control continued, a hint of disdain in her voice. However, Tabita's recent activities have brought him into proximity with one of our offshore data laundering operations. He is not a direct threat, but he is a variable. The consortium does not tolerate variables. His online presence also draws unnecessary hero attention to the area. The mission parameters scrolled across the screen. They were brutally simple. Target, Danjuro Tabita, gentle criminal. Associate, La Brava, quirk. Love provides power boost to target. Objective 1, terminate both targets. Objective 2, erase all online content associated with their activities. Objective 3, make the termination appear to be the result of a rival criminal syndicate. Maintain consortium anonymity. You are the Scalpel, Delta. Control's voice concluded, her eyes seeming to narrow. You are to excise this foolishness with surgical precision. Do not fail. Do not deviate. We are watching. The hologram vanished, leaving Delta alone again in the gray silence. He processed the new data. A simple termination mission. Low threat level, and yet, the memory fragment itched at the edges of its quarantine. The image of a boy in a dark underpass, his dreams turned to ash. The system flagged the lingering thought and attempted to purge it. Another jolt, not from turbulence this time, but from the depths of his own mind, triggered the next cascade. The world dissolved again. This time, it was not into darkness, but into a screaming symphony of white light and unbearable pain. He awoke to the smell of bleach and the feeling of cold steel against his bare skin. He was strapped to a table, his arms, legs, and head locked in heavy restraints. Bright, circular lights glared down from the ceiling, making him squint. Figures in sterile green surgical masks moved in his peripheral vision, their voices muffled and calm. Panic, pure and primal, seized him. "Where am I?" he screamed, his voice raw. "Where's my mom? You said she was hurt." A man in a pristine white lab coat stepped into his line of sight. He had kind, grandfatherly eyes, but they held no warmth. They were the eyes of an entomologist studying an insect. This was Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief architect of his future suffering. "Your mother is fine, Izuku," Dr. Thorne said, his voice smooth as silk. "She believes you ran away from home. A tragic, but not uncommon story for a quirkless boy who was told his dreams were impossible." A note was left. "The police have closed the case. No one is looking for you." The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole Izuku's breath. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering his hope. "No, no, you're lying!" he sobbed, thrashing against his restraints. The metal cuffs didn't budge. "We are not," Thorne said simply. He gestured to one of the masked figures. "Begin Phase 1. Administer the Genesis serum." A needle, thick as a knitting needle, was brought toward his arm. Izuku screamed, a desperate, terrified sound. "No! Please! What are you doing?" "We are giving you a gift, my boy," Thorne said, a flicker of something like excitement in his eyes. "We are giving you the one thing you always wanted. The ability to be more. We are going to make you strong." The needle plunged into his bicep. The fluid that entered his veins was not medicine. It was fire. It was a billion microscopic razors rewriting his DNA on a cellular level. His entire body convulsed. A scream was ripped from his throat, raw and animalistic. It felt as if his bones were dissolving, his muscles tearing themselves from their anchors. His skin burned as if submerged in acid. "Vitals are critical!" a voice shouted. "Heart rate is spiking past 280. He's going into cardiac arrest." "Let it!" Dr. Thorne's voice cut through the chaos, chillingly calm. "The serum requires cellular death to initiate the regenerative process. He must break before he can be rebuilt. Monitor the brain activity. That is all that matters." Izuku's world became a vortex of pure, unadulterated agony. He died on that table. He felt his heart stop, the world go gray and distant. And then, a secondary, even more excruciating wave of pain hit him as the serum kicked in, forcing his heart to beat again, forcing his cells to knit themselves back together in a new, stronger pattern. He healed. He regenerated. It was a miracle born in the deepest pits of hell. This process was repeated for weeks. He would be subjected to horrific injuries, burns, deep lacerations, broken bones, and they would watch, taking notes, as the Genesis serum forced his body to heal at an accelerated rate. They were calibrating his new healing factor, pushing it to its absolute limits, and through it all, he screamed until he had no voice left. He begged until he had no words left. He cried until he had no tears left. Eventually, the boy named Izuku Midoriya started to fade, leaving only a vessel of pain and regeneration. That was when they told him about Phase 2. He was conscious for the adamantium bonding procedure. They told him it was necessary. The healing factor had to be active to prevent his body from rejecting the molten metal, to facilitate the fusion of alloy and bone. He was locked into a different apparatus this time, a massive, chromant steel frame that held him upright, his limbs spread-eagled. Lasers made impossibly precise incisions all over his body, exposing the bone beneath. The smell of his own blood and cauterized flesh filled the air. "The subject is ready," Dr. Thorne's voice announced from an observation booth. "Begin the infusion." A network of thick tubes and humming machinery descended from the ceiling. Heavy, articulated needles, guided by robotic arms, pressed against the exposed surfaces of his bones. Izuku, his mind already fractured from weeks of torture, could only whimper. The first injection was into his left femur. Molten, shimmering adamantium, heated to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, was pumped directly into the marrow of his bone. The pain was beyond description. It was beyond anything a human mind was meant to endure. It was the sound of his soul being set on fire. It was the feeling of the universe collapsing into a single point of agony inside him. His nervous system, hypersensitized by the Genesis serum, screamed. Every cell in his body shrieked in protest. His healing factor fought a desperate, losing battle against the incandescent heat, healing tissue only for it to be instantly seared away again. The fusion was an atomic war happening within him. He screamed. He screamed so loud the reinforced glass of the observation booth vibrated. He screamed until his newly healed vocal cords tore themselves to shreds again, and they continued: femur, tibia, humerus, ribs, vertebrae. One by one, they turned his skeleton from a framework of calcium into an unbreakable cage of metal. The worst was his skull. He felt the burning liquid metal seep into the delicate bones of his cranium, felt the pressure build behind his eyes, heard the sizzle as it neared his brain stem. He blacked out, came to, and blacked out again, his consciousness a flickering candle in a hurricane of torment. When it was over, he hung in the frame, limp and smoking, the smell of ozone and burnt meat thick around him. He was alive. His healing factor, miraculously, had held. His body had accepted the metal. But the boy who had dreamed of being a hero was dead and buried under a mountain of unbreakable, unfeeling alloy. The physical forging was complete. Now they had to forge the mind. System rebooting. Memory cascade has caused minor synaptic instability. Rerouting cognitive function to stabilize. Duration: 4.3 seconds. The cold gray of the kestrel was a comfort. A known quantity. The pain of the past was an anomaly. A phantom limb that still ached. Delta ran a self-diagnostic. Physical status, optimal. Skeletal structure, nominal. Healing factor, standby. Mental status, compromised. The system flagged the final line. Compromised. It was an unacceptable state. He focused on the mission parameters, letting the cold logic of the task at hand wash over him, a tide of sterile data meant to drown the ghosts. But the ghosts were learning to swim. The next flashback wasn't triggered by a jolt or a sound. It bloomed in the silence between his thoughts, a weed growing in the cracks of his programming. It was the final, and most important, part of his creation. He was strapped into a chair. Not a medical table or a surgical frame, but a simple, metallic chair. A heavy helmet was lowered onto his head, clamping him in place. His eyelids were held open by cruel metal prongs. In front of him was a massive screen. Dr. Thorne stood beside him, holding a familiar, charred notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Remarkable, Thorne said, flipping through the pages. Truly. The level of detail. The tactical insight. Your mind, Izuku, is your real gift. Far more potent than any simple quirk. But it is unfocused. It is filled with childish admiration and a misguided desire to save people. He tossed the notebook into an incinerator chute. Izuku watched it go, feeling nothing. There was nothing left inside him to feel. We are going to correct that, Thorne said, his voice taking on a tone of zealous excitement. "We are going to wipe the slate clean and give your analytical prowess a true purpose." The screen flared to life. A storm of flashing lights, subliminal images, and discordant, high-frequency sounds assaulted his senses. It was a digital blitzkrieg designed to shatter the ego, to break down the neural pathways that formed his personality. At the same time, a series of soft clicks sounded from the helmet, and a low-voltage current began to pulse through his brain. It felt like his thoughts were being scrubbed away with sandpaper. He fought it. He clung to the last vestiges of himself. "My name is Izuku Midoriya." A flash of white light. The thought was gone. "My mom." Inko Midoriya. Her smile, Katsudan. A piercing screech. The image of his mother's face dissolved into a blizzard of static. The taste of her cooking turned to ash in his memory. All Might, his smile, saving people, a hero. A wave of electrical energy pulsed through his temporal lobes. The symbol of peace twisted, his heroic smile becoming a grotesque, meaningless rictus before vanishing completely. They scoured his mind for days, a process of systematic, electronic demolition. They erased his childhood, his friendships, his hopes, his fears. They were erasing the very equation of his soul. When the process was complete, he was a blank slate. A body with a functioning brain, but no one inside. He was a vessel, empty and waiting to be filled. And then, they began the upload. They strapped him back into the chair, and this time, the screen showed something different. It was combat data. Thousands of hours of it. Every martial art known to man, from Krav Maga to capoeira. Military tactics from Sun Tzu to modern black ops. Ballistics data, anatomical charts, quirk theory. They fed his own analytical genius back to him, but in a twisted, weaponized form. The screen showed footage of the rabbit hero, Mirko. The old, erased part of his mind would have been thrilled, analyzing her fighting style with awe. The new mind was forced to see it differently. "Observe," Dr. Thorne's voice instructed, as the footage slowed to a crawl. "Her quirk, rabbit, grants her incredible leg strength. Admirable. But her reliance on it creates predictable attack vectors. The fulcrum point of her knee can be shattered with 4,200 pounds of focused pressure. Her thin torso provides minimal protection for her internal organs. She is a glass cannon. A threat to be neutralized." Footage of Endeavor. Not a hero, but a target. "His Hellflame quirk has a maximum output limit. Prolonged use leads to hyperthermia. A battle of attrition, forcing him to expend his energy, is the optimal strategy. His psychological state is volatile, easily manipulated by taunting or threatening bystanders." Footage of All Might. The ultimate symbol, reduced to a set of data points. Subject possesses immense strength, but relies on a finite power source. Note the slight favoring of his left side, an old injury. A sustained, focused assault on this area will cripple his mobility. His public persona requires him to protect civilians at all costs. This is his greatest weakness. An exploitable liability. Over and over, they drilled it into him. His heroes, the gods of his childhood, were deconstructed into meat and weaknesses. His analytical mind, once a tool for admiration, was reforged into a weapon for destruction. And through it all, Dr. Thorne would lean in and whisper the new mantra, the core of his new programming. "Analysis is for threat elimination, not for admiration. Analysis is for threat elimination, not for admiration. Analysis is for threat elimination, not for admiration." The process took months. By the end, the blank slate was filled. There was no Izuku Midoriya. There was no fear, no hope, no love. There was only the mission. There was only the data. There was only the cold, hard logic of combat. They gave him his new name. He was the fourth successful subject of his line. The Greek letter for 4. Delta, weapon Delta. The Kestrel began its descent. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, and the interior lights shifted from white to a deep, tactical red. Approaching LZ. ETA 5 minutes. Prepare for deployment. Delta stood, his movements fluid and precise. The transition from memory to reality was seamless now. The past was a cage, but his programming was the key. He would not be trapped. He would not deviate. The rear ramp of the VTOL hissed open, revealing the night sky of Musutifu. The air that rushed in was different from Yokohama's. It was cleaner, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms from a nearby park and the faint, delicious smell of grilled takoyaki from a street vendor 2 blocks away. The skyline was a familiar jagged line of buildings he had seen every day of his forgotten life. Far in the distance, the twin spires of Yue High School pierced the clouds. His system registered the sensory inputs as irrelevant data. Atmospheric composition, standard. Olfactory data, inconclusive. Visual landmarks, catalogued. But the ghost in his machine stirred. The scent of takoyaki triggered a phantom taste, a memory of a warm, savory treat shared with a face he couldn't see. The sight of the Yue campus sparked a phantom feeling of longing. He suppressed it. He crushed it under the weight of his mission parameters. He was a weapon. This was just another target zone. The people below were not his people. This city was not his home. They were all just potential variables, potential threats, or irrelevant background noise. Weapon Delta stepped onto the ramp, the city lights reflecting as pinpricks in the red lenses of his mask. He was a predator, returning to a hunting ground he didn't know he had once called home. The city was asleep, unaware that one of its lost, broken children had come back, forged into something terrible and new. And he was ready to begin the hunt. The Kestrel did not land. It hovered, a ghost of silent metal, 50 meters above the roof of a derelict textile factory on the industrial outskirts of Musutifu. The city spread out before Weapon Delta like a circuit board of light and shadow, a sprawling network of potential threats and irrelevant civilians. From this height, it was just a grid, a problem to be solved. The jump was a simple calculation of velocity, wind resistance, and gravitational pull. Delta stepped off the ramp into the cool night air, his body a streamlined dart. He fell for precisely 3.8 seconds before firing a high-tensile grapple line from a wrist-mounted device. The line bit into the concrete lip of the roof with a near-silent thump, and his descent slowed to a controlled, whisper-quiet landing. His feet touched the gravel-strewn rooftop with less sound than a settling dust mote. The Kestrel was already gone, melting back into the low-hanging clouds. He was alone. The hunt had begun. His tactical overlay shimmered to life, projecting a holographic map of the district onto his vision. A single red marker pulsed rhythmically. Target, Danjuro Tabita. Last known position, 3.4 kilometers northeast. Broadcast signature detected from a public Wi-Fi hotspot. Current status, stationary. Probable action, uploading new video content. Mission parameters, infiltrate. Terminate. Erase. The path to the target was a simple matter of vector analysis. He could take the rooftops, a direct and efficient route. He began to move, his body a low, flowing shadow. He leaped across a 10-meter gap to the next building, landing in a silent roll, the adamantium in his bones absorbing the impact with zero structural stress. His movements were a symphony of brutal efficiency, honed by thousands of hours of simulated and real-world combat. Yet, as he moved deeper into the city, something began to feel off. It was a subtle friction in his otherwise flawless cognitive process. A jingle, faint and tinny, drifted up from the streets below. It was the theme song for a 24-hour convenience store chain, HeroMart. A cheerful, idiotic tune designed to be catchy and forgettable. Auditory input, commercial melody. Irrelevant data. Filtering. The filter failed. The jingle snagged on something in his mind. For a fleeting moment, a phantom taste surfaced on his tongue, the cloyingly sweet flavor of a limited edition all-might-themed soda. A memory without context, without a source. It was a data ghost, and it caused a 0.02-second lag in his next stride. He dismissed it. A system anomaly. He pushed on. He moved from the industrial sector into the residential zones. The buildings grew smaller, the streets narrower. The air changed, losing its metallic tang and taking on the scent of night-blooming jasmine from a walled garden and the savory aroma of soy and grilled pork from a late-night ramen stand. Olfactory input, organic compounds. Non-threatening. Irrelevant. But the scent of ramen triggered another ghost. A phantom sensation of warmth. Not the searing heat of the adamantium forge, but a comforting, gentle warmth. a bowl held in small hands, steam rising to fog up glasses he didn't wear. A voice, soft and feminine, asking, "Is it good, Izuku?" The name. It wasn't the shouted curse from the Bakugo memory. It was spoken softly. It was his name. System warning, vestigial data corruption detected. Quarantine protocols engaged. He stopped, crouching on the tiled roof of a 2-story home. He pressed a hand to his head, a gesture of frustration his programming shouldn't have allowed. The tactical overlay flickered, the map of the city wavering as his system fought to contain the memory fragments. This was inefficient. This was a malfunction. Control's voice echoed in his memory. Deviations are the first step toward malfunction. He forced the data down, burying it under a wave of cold, hard logic. The mission. The target. Analysis is for threat elimination, not for whatever this was. He recalibrated his route. The holographic line on his map suggested a straight path over the rooftops. But something in him, a deeper, older instinct, rejected it. His eyes were drawn to a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and darkened service corridors below. His internal processors screamed that it was an inefficient path, full of potential choke points and blind corners. And yet his body moved. He dropped from the roof into a darkened alley, landing silently. He navigated the maze of overflowing dumpsters and rusted fire escapes not with his tactical map, but with an unnerving, instinctual familiarity. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that a left turn here would lead to a wider street, that a particular loose drain pipe could be used as a handhold to scale a brick wall. He was moving through the city as if following a well-trodden path from a life he'd never lived. Each step was a contradiction. His programming, the cold, logical god of his mind, told him he was an outsider, an infiltrator in a foreign environment. But his muscles, his very bones, remembered the texture of the pavement, the specific distance between handholds on a familiar wall. He emerged from the alleyways onto a wider, tree-lined street. And he froze. Location identified, Aldera District. Proximity to former residential marker, 800 meters. The system provided the data, but it was the sight before him that caused the real system shock. A block away, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, was a junior high school. A simple, 3-story building of concrete and glass, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Aldera Junior High. The name meant nothing to him. But the sight of it, the sight of the cherry blossom trees lining the entrance, their leaves rustling in the night breeze, the shape of the gate he had just passed through instinctually, it was a key turning in a deep, rusted lock. A wave of something cold and hollow washed over him. It wasn't a memory. It was the feeling a memory leaves behind. A ghost of despair. The echo of countless days of torment and loneliness. He saw the koi pond near the front gate, its surface placid and dark under the moonlight. A flash. The plop of a waterlogged notebook hitting the surface. The mocking laughter of other students. The glint of light off a smug, blonde head. He clutched the side of his head, a low growl escaping his throat. The pain was real this time, a sharp spike behind his optical sensors. Error. Error. Cascade memory trigger detected in close proximity. Location flagged as hazardous to cognitive stability. Recommendation: reroute immediately. He had to get away. This place was poison. It was unraveling the careful, brutal programming that kept him stable, that kept him Delta. He turned to leave, to get back to the mission, but his target's marker on the map chose that exact moment to move. It was heading away from its stationary position, moving directly down the street that ran past the school. Target is mobile. Intercept course plotted. Optimal intercept point, 200 meters ahead. His mission and his mental poison were now on the same path. He had no choice. He had to proceed. He forced his body into motion, slinking into the shadows of the cherry blossom trees. He moved parallel to the street, his senses on high alert, his mind a battlefield between cold logic and the encroaching ghosts of the past. Every familiar crack in the sidewalk, every faded piece of graffiti on the school wall, was another small cut, another point of system instability. He was so focused on suppressing the internal chaos that he almost missed the external one. The sound of an angry, familiar voice cut through the night. "Freaking extra credit on heroic law is such bullshit. Who gives a damn about the Quirk Usage Act of 78? Just let me blast the villains and get it over with. Delta flattened himself into the deep shadow of a concrete pillar at the school's gate. He peered around the edge. 2 figures were walking down the sidewalk, heading in his direction. They wore the uniform of Yue High School, the most prestigious hero academy in the world. One was a boy with spiky red hair and a sharp-toothed grin, trying and failing to placate his companion. The other was a storm of furious energy. Spiky ash-blonde hair. A perpetual, arrogant scowl. He walked with a swagger that was more of a stomp, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Every few steps, his palms would emit a series of sharp crackle-pop sounds, like miniature firecrackers, and a faint smell of burning sugar would drift on the air. It was Katsuki Bakugo. Biosignature scan. Subject identified Katsuki Bakugo. Student Yue High Class 1A, Quirk, Explosion. Threat level, 710. Note, subject is a high-profile civilian. Mission parameters dictate avoidance of engagement. The system's analysis was cold and clinical. But Delta's reaction was not. The sight of Bakugo didn't trigger a memory. It triggered a primal, physical response. The muscles in his back and shoulders coiled tight, a preemptive flinch against a blow he couldn't remember. His healing factor, for no discernible reason, kicked into a low-level standby, a state it usually only entered when anticipating imminent, severe trauma. Come on, Bakugo, it's not that bad, the red-haired boy, Kirishima, was saying. Aizawa-sensei just wants us to be prepared for the legal stuff. It's manly to know the rules. It's a waste of my goddamn time, shitty hair. Bakugo snarled, kicking a loose pebble. It skidded across the pavement, and came to a stop near Delta's hiding spot. I should be out there training, not reading some dusty old textbook written by a bunch of pencil-pushing cowards. He let out a frustrated growl and pulled one hand from his pocket, igniting a small, contained explosion in his palm. It was a gesture of irritation, nothing more. But the explosion released a concentrated puff of his unique biosignature into the air. The scent hit Weapon Delta like a physical blow. It was acrid and sweet, the smell of nitroglycerin and burnt caramel. It was the scent of arrogance and power, of casual cruelty and overwhelming force. It was a smell his conscious mind had never encountered, but his soul had never forgotten. The scent bypassed every firewall, every quarantine protocol, every line of code that held him together. It was a master key that unlocked the deepest, most heavily fortified dungeon in his mind, and the world shattered. The concrete pillar, the moonlit street, the uniforms, it all dissolved into a searing white-hot flash. He was no longer Weapon Delta, the cold, efficient killer. He was no longer the empty vessel on a sterile table. He was Izuku Midoriya, 14 years old, small and shaking and utterly terrified. He was on his knees on scorched pavement. Heat radiated against his face, stinging his eyes. The smell of burnt sugar filled his lungs, choking him. Laughter, cruel and sharp, echoed all around him, and a voice he knew better than his own, roared with triumphant glee. You're just a quirkless loser. You'll never be a hero. You're useless. A DKU. The word wasn't just a sound. It was a physical impact. It was the brand being pressed into his flesh. It was the summation of every insult, every burn, every moment of worthlessness he had ever felt. The flashback was a fraction of a second, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. The world snapped back into focus. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't the clean, manageable pain of a bullet hitting his ribs or a knife breaking on his forearm. This was a messy, agonizing pain that had no physical source. It was the shriek of his entire neurological system tearing itself apart. His programming and his stolen past were at war, and the battlefield was his mind. Critical system failure. CASCADMEMORYINTRUSION. Identity protocols. CORRUPTED. Threat assessment. UNIDNTIFIEDSELFTARGETPARADOX. Recommended action. TRMINATESCAPNULLNULL. Error ERROR. The tactical overlay in his vision dissolved into a scramble of nonsensical characters and error codes. Red warning signals flashed across his vision. A high-frequency alarm, audible only to him, screeched in his ears. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his head as he bit back a scream. His entire body trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of two incompatible realities trying to occupy the same space. He was Weapon Delta, an unstoppable living weapon, whose unbreakable bones had crushed men and shattered concrete. He was Izuku Midoriya, a fragile, terrified boy who had been told he was less than nothing. The contradiction was tearing him apart. On the street, Bakugo stopped walking. He had felt it more than seen it, a sudden, sharp movement in the shadows by the school gate. His combat instincts, honed by his time at UA, were screaming at him. "Who the hell's there?" he growled, his palms starting to glow with orange light. Kirishima tensed beside him, his skin hardening slightly. "Whoa man, chill out. It's probably just a cat. Cats don't move like that," Bakugo muttered, his crimson eyes scanning the darkness. He saw a figure, half hidden by the pillar, clutching its head. The person was trembling, making a low, guttural sound of pain. They were dressed in black, their face obscured by the shadows and a mask he couldn't make out. All Bakugo saw was a stranger acting erratically, a weirdo. Delta's programming, what was left of it, was fighting for control. It recognized the threat. Bakugo was alert, his quirk primed. He was a hostile. Threat detected. Action. TRMINATE. For a terrifying split second, his body responded. His hand lowered from his head, his fingers tensing, ready to launch himself from the shadows and neutralize the source of his agony. He could snap Bakugo's neck before his companion could even react. The calculation was instant, the plan brutally efficient. But then Izuku's mind screamed back. No! Kaken! The name, another ghost from the past, was a bucket of ice water on the fire. It wasn't a curse like Deku. It was something else. Something complicated and painful and tied to 1,000 shared memories he couldn't access. The conflict brought him to his knees. A choked gasp escaped his lips. Bakugo took a step forward, his scowl deepening. "The hell is wrong with you? You on something?" He couldn't see the face clearly, just the glint of the red optical sensors on the mask, which seemed to flicker like dying embers. He saw the scars crisscrossing the visible parts of the man's neck and jawline. He saw a dangerous-looking stranger having some kind of breakdown. Bakugo's arrogance and impatience won out over his caution. This wasn't a villain setting an ambush. It was just some freak. TCH. He scoffed, losing interest. He turned away, shoving his hands back in his pockets. "Fucking weirdo. Let's go, Kirishima. I'm not wasting my time on this." Kirishima threw one last concerned glance toward the shadows before jogging to catch up. "Right behind you, man." They walked away, their voices fading down the street, completely oblivious. They had no idea that they had just walked past a ghost. They had no idea that Katsuki Bakugo had just, with a single, careless whiff of his presence, nearly shattered the mind of one of the world's most dangerous living weapons. To him, it was a non-event, a weirdo in the shadows. Forgotten before they'd even turned the corner. For Delta, it was the apocalypse. He remained on his knees in the darkness for a full minute after they were gone, his body shaking uncontrollably. He forced himself to regulate his breathing, using the meditation techniques that had been drilled into him to regain control. System rebooting from critical failure. Restoring core programming. Identity protocols damaged. Attempting repairs. Repair failed. Quarantining corrupted identity node. Izuku Midoriya. Memory fragment tagged Katsuki Bakugo. Source of critical instability. High priority threat. Auditory data string isolated. Deku. Meaning unknown. Emotional payload. Extreme negative stimulus. Designation pain trigger. He slowly, shakily, got to his feet. His programming was back in control, but it was a tenuous, frayed control. The machine had been broken and hastily patched back together. The cracks were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping fissures. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He clenched them into fists, the adamantium-laced knuckles grinding together. The familiar sensation of unyielding strength was a comforting anchor in the storm of his mind. He was Weapon Delta. That was his function. That was his reality. The rest was a phantom limb, a ghost in the machine that had to be exorcised. But the name echoed. Deku. It felt like a brand on his soul, a word seared into him that he couldn't see but could always feel. His programming had no definition for it, but the sliver of the boy still trapped inside knew exactly what it was. It was a word that meant useless, worthless, broken, and for the first time, the weapon felt an emotion that wasn't a system error. It was a cold, quiet, simmering rage. A rage directed at the blonde boy who walked away without a care. A rage directed at the ghosts that haunted him. A rage directed at the very machine he was, a machine that was beginning to rust from the inside out. He had a mission to complete. He forced the turmoil down, locking it away behind the restored firewalls of his conditioning. He reactivated his tactical overlay. The map was stable again. The red marker for his target had stopped moving a few blocks away. He began to move, but his perfect, economic grace was gone. There was a new tension in his shoulders, a subtle hesitation in his stride. He was still a weapon, still a predator, but a predator that had just been grievously wounded in a way it could not comprehend and could not heal. The ghost of Musutifu was no longer just hunting, it was haunted. The city's heartbeat was a low thrum against the soles of Weapon Delta's boots. The encounter with Bakugo had left a tremor in his systems, a persistent, low-grade static that buzzed just beneath the surface of his cold logic. His programming had reasserted control, but it was like a king ruling a fractured, mutinous kingdom. The ghosts were quiet for now, banished to the dungeons of his mind, but their whispers still echoed in the halls. Cognitive stability, 82%. Mission focus, 95%. Vestigial emotional residue, unacceptable. He pushed the diagnostic reports away, burying them under the immediate needs of the mission. The target, Denjuro Tabita, had gone to ground. His broadcast signature now emanated from a fixed point, the top floor of the Musutifu Grand Archive, a municipal building that housed centuries of city records. It was an odd choice for a hideout, but Delta's mission was not to understand the target's motives, only to terminate his existence. The archive was a modern, 10-story structure of glass and white marble, an island of sterile order in a sea of bustling, chaotic city life. It was closed for the night, its interior dark save for the dim glow of emergency lighting. Analysis. Target has chosen a location with limited entry points and excellent lines of sight. Amateurish, but tactically sound for avoiding conventional pursuit. Security systems, standard municipal grade. Motion sensors, magnetic locks, pressure plates at primary entrances. Easily bypassed. Delta circled the building from the rooftops opposite, his optical sensors scanning every window, every ventilation shaft, every potential seam in the building's armor. He found his entry point in less than 30 seconds, a maintenance access hatch on the roof, its electronic lock connected to the main grid. A simple targeted EMP burst from a device on his wrist would fry the circuit and grant him access. The mission parameters were clear: avoid hero engagement. This was a quiet, surgical strike. Get in, eliminate the targets, erase the data, and melt back into the night. No witnesses, no alarms, no complications. He was poised on the edge of the roof, ready to launch his grapple line and begin his infiltration, when the first complication announced itself with a deafening, guttural roar. From the street 2 blocks north, a sound like tearing metal and shattering concrete ripped through the night. It was followed by a chorus of panicked screams. Delta's head snapped towards the sound. His sensors zoomed in, cutting through the darkness. A villain attack. It was as common to this city as rain. A hulking brute of a man, his body grotesquely swollen with tumorous, rock-like growths, was rampaging down the street. His quirk appeared to be a simple but devastating gigantification and dermal hardening power. He tore a lamppost from its foundation and swung it like a club, smashing the storefront of a bakery. Powdered sugar and shattered glass erupted into the air. Threat identified, unregistered villain. Quirk, mutation class, mass density manipulation. Threat level, 610, high collateral damage potential. Status, irrelevant to primary mission. Delta's programming immediately dismissed the chaos. It was a distraction. A variable to be ignored. His focus remained on the silent, dark archive building. But then, the sirens began to wail. Red and blue lights painted the surrounding buildings in strobing, frantic colors. Police barricades were being erected. Civilians were being evacuated. And with the police came the heroes. Delta watched from his perch as two pro-heroes arrived on the scene. The first was Kamui Woods, his lacquered wooden limbs already beginning to snake out, attempting to ensnare the rampaging villain. The second was Empty Lady, who gigantified at a safe distance, preparing to engage the villain on his own terms. The fight was loud, flashy, and destructive. It was also drawing a perimeter. The archive building, once an anonymous structure, was now located squarely on the edge of the official hero engagement zone. Situation update: hero presence detected. Mission parameter compromised. Probability of incidental contact elevated to 47%. Recommendation: abort mission and await new opportunity. Delta's logic was clear. The risk was now too high. A clean, silent operation was impossible. He should retreat, report to control, and wait for the situation to resolve. It was the only logical course of action. He prepared to pull back into the shadows. But then, his audio sensors picked up a snippet of conversation from the police comms channel he was monitoring. "Suspect is the information broker we've had our eye on, gentle criminal," a gruff voice said. "We think he's holed up in the archive building. The villain attack might just be a coincidence, but we can't risk him slipping away in the chaos. Aizawa is en route to secure the building." The information slammed into Delta's processors. Aizawa. Eraserhead. Threat identified. Pro-hero Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa. Quirk, Erasure. Threat level, 910. Note: subject's quirk is ineffective against non-quirk-based enhancements. However, subject possesses exceptional combat skills, stealth capabilities, and tactical acumen. High-risk opponent. The situation had changed. The mission was no longer just compromised, it was on a timer. If Aizawa secured the building first, the target would be captured, not eliminated. The data would be seized by the heroes, not destroyed. That would be a mission failure. Control did not tolerate failure. Recalibrating. New recommendation: expedite infiltration. Neutralize target before hero arrival. ETA for Aizawa, 6 minutes. The logical choice was now to accelerate. He had a 6-minute window. It was more than enough time. He ignored the escalating battle between the giant villain and the heroes. He ignored the flashing lights and the screaming crowds. He fired his grapple line. It connected with the roof of the archive, and he swung across the street, a black pendulum against the chaotic backdrop. He landed on the roof as silently as before, the sounds of the battle below masking any minute noise he might have made. He moved to the access hatch. The EMP device on his wrist whined for a split second. The electronic lock sparked and died. He lifted the heavy metal hatch and slipped inside, lowering it behind him. He was in. The interior of the building was a tomb of shadows and silence. The air was cool and dry, thick with the smell of old paper and dust. He was in a top-floor maintenance corridor. His tactical overlay switched to thermal vision, painting the world in shifting blues, greens, and reds. 2 heat signatures detected. Floor 10 North Wing. 1 stationary, 1 moving erratically. Heart rates elevated. Signatures consistent with target profiles, Denjuro to Beta and La Brava. He moved through the corridor, his footsteps completely absorbed by the industrial carpeting. He was a phantom, his presence undetectable. He came to a fire door that led into the main archive stacks. The lock was a simple mechanical one. A sliver of adamantium, no thicker than a credit card, slid from a hidden compartment in his fingertip. He inserted it into the lock mechanism. A twist, a soft click, and the lock disengaged. It was a skill uploaded into his brain, performed with the detached precision of a machine. He pushed the door open a crack and peered through. He was looking down a long, cavernous aisle, flanked on both sides by towering, 20-foot-tall shelves packed with dusty tomes and document boxes. The only light came from the emergency fixtures on the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows. At the far end of the aisle, he saw them. Gentle Criminal, his dramatic white coat a stark contrast to the gloom, was pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. La Brava, a tiny girl with bright pink hair, was frantically typing on a sophisticated-looking laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "This is a disaster, La Brava, an absolute catastrophe." Gentle was lamenting, his voice a theatrical stage whisper. "My grand debut in this city, the video that was to cement my legacy, is being upstaged by this brutish lout in the streets. The heroes will be swarming this place any moment. I'm trying, Gentle," La Brava squeaked, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm trying to wipe our signature from the network and erase the video, but the police are running electronic countermeasures because of the villain attack. It's slowing me down." Delta processed the conversation. They were panicked. Distracted. Perfect. He could end this in seconds. A single, silent rush down the aisle. 2 precise strikes. It would be over before they even knew he was there. His body tensed, muscles coiling for the attack. Optimal takedown window, now. He was about to move. And then, a new sound reached him. Not from inside the building. Not from the villain fight outside. It was a voice. A single, booming voice that cut through the sirens, the crashes, and the screams with the force of a thunderclap. It was a voice that didn't need a microphone, a voice that carried an impossible weight of power and authority. "Fear not, citizens!" The sound vibrated through the marble of the building, through the soles of Delta's boots, and directly into the core of his being. "For I am here!" Through the massive window at the end of the archive aisle, a figure descended from the sky. It was a silhouette at first, backlit by the strobing police lights, but it was an unmistakable silhouette. The V-shaped antenna of hair. The impossibly broad shoulders. He landed in the street below with the force of a meteor, the asphalt cracking under his boots. The light caught him, and he was revealed in all his glory. The red, white, and blue costume, the fists planted firmly on his hips. And the smile. The indomitable, unwavering smile that had been the symbol of peace and hope for generations. All might had arrived. Inside the archive, weapon Delta froze. His hand, which had been resting on the edge of the door, fell slack. His posture, coiled and ready for a lethal strike, went rigid. His entire being locked up. The tactical overlay in his vision did not just flicker this time. It shattered. It exploded into a blizzard of static and corrupted code, a digital death scream. The cold, logical machine that had been his constant companion, his guide, his very identity, crashed. It didn't just fail, it ceased to exist, and in the silent, gaping void it left behind, the ghosts didn't just whisper. They roared. For the first time since he was a terrified boy in a white, windowless van, he was not Weapon Delta. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he was looking at God. The torrent of memory was not a flash this time. It was a flood. The dam of his conditioning didn't just crack, it was obliterated. A lifetime of repressed adoration, of pure, undiluted hero worship, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He saw his childhood bedroom, every square inch of it a shrine to this man. Posters on the walls. Action figures lining the shelves. Bed sheets patterned with his smiling face. He saw himself as a tiny boy, no older than 4, perched in front of a computer, his eyes wide with wonder. He was watching a grainy video on a loop. The debut of All Might, the hero, laughing fearlessly as he pulled dozens of people from a fiery bus wreck. He could hear his own tiny, squeaking voice, pointing at the screen and asking his mother, "Mom, he's so cool. Can I be a hero like him, too?" He could feel the phantom warmth of her hand on his head. "Oh, Izuku. I'm sure you can be anything you want to be." He could feel the crushing, soul-deep despair when the doctor had given him the diagnosis. The extra joint in his pinky toe. The word quirkless. The death of a dream before it had even begun. He could feel the desperate, pathetic hope he clung to for 10 more years. The notebooks. The analysis. The endless belief that if he just studied hard enough, if he was just smart enough, he could somehow bridge the impossible gap between himself and his idol. And then, the rooftop. The skeletal form. The steam. The crushing, final words. "You need to be realistic, kid." The adoration. The hope. The despair. The agony. Decades of the most powerful, formative emotions of his life, emotions that had been systematically tortured, burned, and scrubbed from his mind, came rushing back in a single, cataclysmic wave. He stumbled back from the door, his hand flying to his chest. He couldn't breathe. The air in the silent archive was suddenly too thick, too heavy. His adamantium-laced ribs, which had shrugged off bullets and shattered concrete, felt like they were collapsing inward, crushed by the weight of a returned soul. A sound escaped his lips. Not a word. Not a grunt. A raw, ragged gasp of a boy drowning in his own history. At the end of the aisle, La Brava heard it. Her head snapped up from her laptop, her large, expressive eyes wide with fear. Gentle! Did you hear that? Gentle, who had been frozen in awe by the arrival of All Might, whirled around. Hear what, my dear? A noise! From that door! She whispered, pointing a trembling finger directly at Delta's position. He had been compromised. The old programming, the Delta protocols, tried to reboot. A few lines of corrupted text flickered in his vision. Threat detected. Neutralize. But the command was meaningless. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed, caught between the instinct of the weapon and the overwhelming, crippling awe of the boy. He looked past the two panicked targets, through the window, at the battle unfolding in the street. It wasn't a battle. It was a statement. All Might moved. He was a blur of primary colors and impossible force. The rock-skinned villain threw a punch with the lamppost, a blow that could have leveled a building. All Might caught it with one hand, the metal pole bending around his fist like tinfoil. A bit of a temper, aren't we? All Might's voice boomed, his smile never faltering. Perhaps you just need to cool off. He wrenched the lamppost from the villain's grip, tossed it aside, and delivered a single, open-palmed slap to the villain's chest. It looked almost casual, but the shockwave was biblical. An invisible cone of force erupted from the point of impact. The air itself seemed to ripple. The windows of the archive building bulged inward, groaning under the pressure, before exploding. A hurricane of wind and glass shards blasted through the archive. Towering shelves of books and documents swayed violently. Loose papers were whipped into a swirling vortex. Gentle and La Brava screamed, shielding their faces as they were thrown back by the force. Delta took the full force of the blast standing up. The wind tore at his tactical suit. Shards of glass, flying like bullets, peppered his body, either shattering on his adamantium skeleton or embedding themselves harmlessly in his flesh, only to be pushed out moments later by his healing factor. He didn't even notice. His eyes were fixed on All Might. Fixed on the symbol. The villain, his rock-like armor cracking and shattering, was lifted from his feet and sent flying backwards down the street, unconscious before he even hit the ground. With a single, effortless blow, the fight was over. All Might stood in the epicenter of the destruction he had wrought, a colossus in a storm of swirling debris. He placed his hands on his hips again, his smile as bright as ever. The crowd, which had been screaming in fear moments before, erupted into a deafening cheer. It was everything Izuku Midoriya had ever dreamed of. It was power used not to kill, not to destroy, but to protect. It was strength in the service of hope. It was the living embodiment of the word hero. And standing there, a ghost in a dead man's shell, looking at the symbol of his entire life, a single, devastating question burned through the noise in his mind. What have I become? He looked at his own hands. Hands that had snapped necks, crushed throats, and ended lives with cold, surgical efficiency. Hands that were designed to be weapons of terror for a shadowy organization that stood for everything All Might fought against. He was a monster, a perversion, a thing built from the broken pieces of a boy who had once idolized the man in the street below. The contradiction was a physical agony. His mind, his soul, couldn't reconcile the two realities. The boy who worshipped the hero, and the weapon designed to kill him if ordered. A sharp, electronic tone cut through his thoughts. It was the comms unit behind his ear, the one he thought was just for receiving orders. It was activating on its own. Control's voice, colder and sharper than he had ever heard it, hissed directly into his skull. Delta. Report. What is your status? We are reading a catastrophic neurocascade. Your vital signs are critical. You are malfunctioning. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't have the words. The mission is compromised. Control's voice continued, laced with venom. The target is secondary now. Your programming is compromised. This symbol is a corrupting influence we failed to account for. Abort. I repeat, abort. Disengage and exfiltrate to the secondary rally point immediately. Abort? Retreat? His programming screamed at him to obey. It was a direct order from his handler. Survival depended on it, but he couldn't take his eyes off All Might. The hero was now helping a paramedic lift a piece of rubble off a trapped civilian, his smile softening into one of genuine compassion. This was the truth. Everything else, the training, the pain, the programming, was a lie. His hand, moving with a will of its own, a will that was not Delta's but his, reached up to the comms unit behind his ear. His fingers closed around the small, high-tech device. Delta, do you copy? Control's voice was a furious squawk in his ear. Acknowledge your orders. Failure to comply will result in activation of the termination protocol. He knew what that was. A micro-explosive implanted at the base of his skull. A final, absolute failsafe to ensure their assets never fell into enemy hands. But in that moment, death felt less terrifying than the monster he had been forced to become. With a surge of strength fueled by a decade of repressed pain and a single moment of devastating clarity, he ripped the comms unit from his ear. Wires and a small amount of blood came with it. The sensitive skin healed in a second. He looked at the small, black device in his palm. It was his leash. It was the voice of his masters. He crushed it. The advanced alloy and circuitry crumpled in his fist like a paper cup. The last, tinny shriek from Control was cut off as the device turned to dust and scrap metal. He was off the grid. He was free. And he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He was no longer a weapon receiving orders. He was a broken thing, a failed experiment, standing in the ruins of a library and the ruins of his own mind, with the symbol of his shattered dreams standing victorious in the street just 100 feet away. The mission was a failure. His conditioning was a failure. He was a failure, and for the first time in years, he had to decide what to do next. The weapon was broken. What was left? The silence that followed the destruction of the comms unit was more profound than any noise. It was the silence of a severed connection, the sudden, terrifying quiet of a puppet whose strings had been cut. For years, the voice of Control, the constant stream of data from his handlers, had been the framework of his existence. Now, there was nothing. Only the roar of the cheering crowd outside, the whisper of the wind through the shattered windows, and the frantic, panicked breathing of his former targets. He was still in the shadows of the archive aisle, his hand clenched around the mangled remains of his leash. The name Izuku was a raw, open wound in his mind, while the identity of Delta was a fractured, glitching operating system. He was a paradox, a ghost haunting its own corpse. His first instinct, the deeply ingrained command of the weapon, was to finish the mission. Two targets, panicked and disoriented, were just a few meters away. Termination would be simple. It would be a return to the familiar, to the cold, hard calculus of violence that had defined him. He took a half-step forward, his body automatically shifting into a predatory crouch. Gentle criminal, finally recovering his wits, had helped La Brava to her feet. They were huddled behind a large, overturned oak desk, peering out at the chaos in the street, their backs to him. Incredible, Gentle breathed, a note of genuine awe in his voice as he watched All Might. Such overwhelming theatricality. He has stolen my stage, but I must admit, the performance is breathtaking. Gentle, this isn't the time. La Brava hissed, tugging on his sleeve. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted around the darkened, debris-strewn archive. That noise? I know I heard something. We have to get out of here before more heroes arrive. Her fear was a scent in the air, a vulnerability his training screamed at him to exploit. His hand began to lift, fingers hardening into a spear hand strike. He could cross the distance in a single bound, but then he saw it. Through the shattered window, All Might gave a final, reassuring thumbs up to a news camera before launching himself into the sky, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. The symbol was gone, and with his departure, the raw, overwhelming wave of emotion that had shattered Delta's conditioning receded, not disappearing, but settling into a deep, agonizing ache in his chest. The sight of the hero had been a catalyst, a bomb that had leveled his mental defenses. Now, in the aftermath, he was left standing in the rubble. He looked at the two figures cowering behind the desk. They weren't targets on a screen anymore. They were just people. Frightened, absurd people. A man with a silly coat and a girl with pink hair. Killing them felt. He didn't have a word for it. The concept of wrong was a foreign language his mind was only just beginning to learn. His programming told him it was necessary. The broken boy inside him, the one who had just remembered what a hero was, recoiled from the thought. The conflict was paralyzing. He was frozen, a statue of indecision in the shadows. It was La Brava's panicked gasp that broke the spell. Her sharp eyes, scanning the darkness, finally locked onto his position. She saw him, a dark shape in the deeper shadows of the doorway, a form that did not belong. The red glint of his optical sensors, though dimmed, was unmistakable. Her scream was pure, undiluted terror. Gentle, she pointed a trembling finger, and gentle whirled around. His eyes widened, his flamboyant demeanor vanishing, replaced by a stark, primal fear. He saw not a man, but a predator that had been stalking them from the darkness. Delta's window for a clean, surgical strike was gone. His hesitation had cost him the element of surprise. The weapon's instinct for survival took over. They were witnesses. They had seen him. Protocol was clear, no witnesses. But the thought of killing them, of snuffing out their lives in cold blood, was now abhorrent. He was trapped between two irreconcilable directives, so he chose a third option. He fled. He turned and melted back into the maintenance corridor, his movements once again silent and fluid, but now driven by a desperate need to escape not just the building, but the choice he couldn't bring himself to make. Behind him, he heard Gentle's voice, trembling but regaining a sliver of its theatrical bravado. Who goes there? Reveal yourself, you shadow-lurking fiend. He didn't wait for more. He moved with blinding speed, back the way he came, up through the access hatch and onto the roof. The city air felt cold against his heated skin. The distant sirens were now closing in, a web of authority tightening around the archive. He had to disappear. He sprinted across the rooftop and launched himself into the night, firing his grapple line towards a distant building. As he swung through the air, a ghost against the moonlit clouds, he was no longer a hunter. He was the hunted. Deep in a subterranean bunker miles beneath the polished corporate facade of a Tokyo skyscraper, the world was ending in a storm of controlled, furious silence. This was the command center for the consortium's Far East operations. A circular room, its walls a seamless screen of data feeds and biometric readouts. In the center, on a raised dais, sat a single woman in a severe, high-collared suit. Control. She stared at a massive central screen that displayed a single, flashing, blood-red icon. Asset, Weapon Delta, Status, Offline Rogue. Last known location, Musutifu Grand Archive. Communication link, severed, forcibly. Biometrics, critical neural cascade unstable. Termination protocol, attempted. Failed, countermeasures disabled. Her face, usually a mask of icy composure, was tight with a rage that seemed to lower the temperature of the room. She had watched the entire incident unfold through Delta's own optical feed before it had cut out. She had seen the arrival of All Might. She had witnessed the system crash, the catastrophic failure of years of conditioning. She had given the order to abort, and she had been defied. She had then activated the termination protocol, the final failsafe. A simple command that should have sent a lethal electrical surge to the microbomb at the base of Delta's skull. But the command had returned in error. Countermeasures disabled. He must have found and removed it, a feat of self-surgery that should have been impossible without access to their specialized medical bays. It was a testament to the very analytical genius they had sought to weaponize. He had turned it against them. He broke, she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper that carried more menace than any shout. The symbol of peace, that ridiculous, smiling buffoon, broke him. A man in a sleek, dark suit stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the dais. He was lean, with silver hair and the cold, dead eyes of a shark. This was Kaido, her second in command, the one who handled the operational details. The asset is a total loss, Control, Kaido stated, his voice flat. Worse, it's a liability. It knows our protocols, our communication frequencies. Its body is a living repository of our most advanced proprietary technology. If the heroes capture it, they will not capture it. Control interrupted, her voice cutting like glass. Her dark eyes swiveled to fix on him. This is not a loss. This is a mess. And we are going to clean it up. Activate Protocol Chimera. Kaito's composure flickered for the barest fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Control, are you sure? Omega is volatile. Using him on Japanese soil, so close to Udata, Omega was designed for this. Control snapped. He was designed to hunt our failures. He is the alpha predator of our little ecosystem. He understands them. He enjoys breaking them, and he will not be compromised by a ghost of a memory or a foolish cartoon hero. She swiveled her chair to face a secondary screen, her fingers flying across a holographic interface. A new dossier appeared, dominating the display. It was the profile of a man with a savage, feral grin, his musculature grotesquely overdeveloped. Asset, Weapon Omega, Enhancements, Hyperadrenal Healing Factor, Aggression-Induced, Reinforced Skeletal Structure, Osmium Alloy, Cybernetic Claws, Enhanced Sensory Suite, Olfactory, Auditory, Psych Profile, Predatory. Sadistic. Highly effective. Delta's enhancements were designed for stealth and surgical precision. Control mused, a cold, cruel smile touching her lips for the first time. He is a scalpel. Omega. Omega is a chainsaw. Send the chainsaw to clean up the scalpel's mess. She brought up a satellite map of Musutifu, a grid of streets and buildings. Omega's team is already on standby at the Yokohama facility. Get them airborne. Delta's last known location was the archive. He is wounded, mentally and spiritually if not physically. He will seek shelter. He will revert to his base instincts. He will find a hole to hide in. Omega will sniff him out. Her final orders were delivered with chilling finality. The mission is no longer retrieval. The asset is compromised beyond repair. The new directive is simple: hunt and erase. Find Weapon Delta. Tear the technology from his bones, and leave nothing behind for the heroes to find. Nothing at all. At the Musutifu Police Department, the atmosphere was a mix of controlled chaos and exhausted relief. The rock-skinned villain was in custody. Empty Lady was giving a bubbly, self-congratulatory statement to the press, and Kamui Woods was overseeing the initial damage assessment. Inside, in a quiet, sterile interrogation room, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi sat across from a hero who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. Shota Aizawa, his hero costume on under his worn gray scarf, looked more tired than usual. His eyes were red-rimmed, not just from quirk use, but from a deep, gnawing suspicion that something about the night's events was profoundly wrong. The official report is simple, Tsukachi said, sliding a folder across the metal table. Villain attack successfully suppressed by responding heroes. Case closed. Aizawa didn't even glance at the folder. It's not that simple. My quirk says you believe that. Tsukachi sighed, leaning back in his chair. His lie detector quirk was a simple, invaluable tool. So, talk to me, Shota. What did you find? Aizawa placed a small, plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a mangled piece of black composite and wiring. It was the crushed comms unit. I was the first hero on scene at the archive, right after All Might left. Aizawa began, his voice a low monotone. The targets, Gentle Criminal and La Brava, were hysterical, babbling about a shadow monster that was watching them before the shockwave hit. I wrote it off as panic. Standard procedure. I did a sweep of the building to ensure it was secure. He tapped the evidence bag. I found this on the floor of a maintenance corridor on the 10th floor. It was still warm. Tsukachi leaned forward, peering at the crushed device. Military grade? Beyond that, Aizawa confirmed. I ran a preliminary scan with the precinct's tech. The alloy is unknown. The circuitry is a hyperdense quantum weave. It's at least a decade ahead of anything on the open market, or even in the HPSC's RD labs. This is black budget, ghost level tech, and it was just left there. It was crushed, Aizawa corrected. By hand, judging from the pressure indentations. The force required to do that would be significant. But that's not the most interesting part. He pushed the bag closer. The tech was able to pull a fragmented data burst from the moments before it was destroyed. It was a one-way transmission. In order, Sukachi raised an eyebrow. What did it say? The voice was female, digitally altered, but the message was clear. She referenced a catastrophic neurocascade, called the subject Delta, and ordered him to abort and exfiltrate. She also mentioned a termination protocol. The room went cold. Termination protocols were the stuff of spy thrillers and shadow wars, not petty crime in Musutifu. So, we have an unknown third party. Sukachi summarized, his mind racing. Someone with bleeding-edge technology, superhuman strength, and a handler who can order his execution remotely. This Delta was clearly there for gentle criminal. The villain attack was just a coincidence that complicated his mission. He aborted, Aizawa said, a strange look in his eyes. He had his targets cornered, but he aborted. And he destroyed his comms, intentionally cutting himself off from his handlers. Why? Maybe the hero presence spooked him, Sukachi offered. Aizawa shook his head. Someone with this level of tech and training isn't easily spooked. He was on the scene before All Might arrived. No, something else happened. The handler mentioned a neurocascade, a psychological break. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing, incomplete puzzle. They had a ghost, an invisible player in a game they didn't understand. This wasn't a standard villain. This was something else. An operative, a soldier. I want to run this through Nizu, Aizawa said finally. Cross-reference the tech signature with any unsolved impossible crimes on the international database. Assassinations, data thefts, anything with a surgical, ghost-like signature. Good idea. Sukachi agreed, already making a note. In the meantime, I'll run a search on this end. The call sign was Delta, you said? Yes. Weapon Delta. Sukachi paused. Weapon? Not agent or operative, that's what the handler called him. Aizawa confirmed, his expression grim. Like he wasn't a person. Just a tool. The detective fell silent, a thought beginning to percolate in the back of his mind. A highly trained operative, possibly with physical enhancements instead of a quirk, suffering a psychological break in the middle of Musutifu. It was a long shot, a wild, improbable leap of logic. But his instincts, honed over years of detective work, screamed at him to pull the thread. He turned to his terminal. I'm going to run a different kind of search. Let's check the national database for missing persons. Specifically, quirkless children. From, say, 3 to 5 years ago. Aizawa looked at him, a flicker of understanding in his tired eyes. A quirkless child, with no power to fight back and no prospects in a superpowered society, would be the perfect raw material for an organization looking to build a controllable weapon from the ground up. Invisible. Disposable. A blank slate. The search parameters were entered. The database began to churn. And as the names and faces of forgotten children began to scroll up the screen, a single file, flagged for its proximity to Aldera Junior High, was pushed to the top of the list. The photo showed a round-faced boy with a spray of freckles and a shock of unruly green hair. His smile was shy but hopeful, his eyes wide and bright with a dream that had yet to be broken. The name below the picture was Izuka Midoriya. He ran. He moved through the city's underbelly, a world of rusted fire escapes, overflowing dumpsters, and graffiti-stained brick. The sterile, efficient routes of the weapon were gone, replaced by the desperate, instinctual flight of prey. His mind was a maelstrom of fractured images and warring identities. A sterile lab, the smell of ozone and pain, the bright, heroic smile of All Might, the sneer of a blonde boy wreathed in explosions, the cold, commanding voice of control. He was a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a different, terrifying part of a life he couldn't piece together. He needed somewhere to hide. Somewhere to think. Somewhere the ghosts couldn't find him. His instincts, the muscle memory from a life he was only just beginning to remember, guided him. He found himself in a part of the city he vaguely recognized, the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, or what was left of it. It wasn't a beach anymore. It was a landfill. For years, illegal dumping had turned the once scenic coastline into a mountain range of scrap metal, broken appliances, and discarded junk. The air was thick with the smell of rust and salt and decay. It was a forgotten place, an eyesore the city had given up on. It was perfect. He found shelter deep within the metallic labyrinth, in a hollowed-out, overturned shipping container. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of rust. It felt safe. He slumped against the cold metal wall, his body finally allowing itself to feel the full weight of his psychological collapse. He pulled off the featureless black mask, letting it fall to the grimy floor. For the first time in years, he looked at his own face, his reflection captured in a shard of a broken mirror lying amidst the junk. It was the face of a stranger. The freckles of his childhood were still there, faint constellations on his cheeks, but they were lost in a landscape of scars. A thin, white line cut through his right eyebrow. A starburst of paler skin marked his jaw where a bone had been shattered and healed. His eyes were the worst. They were the same vibrant green he vaguely remembered, but they were hollow, haunted. They were the eyes of a man who had looked into the abyss and found it staring back from inside him. He was 17. He should have been in his third year of high school, worrying about exams and his future. Instead, he was a scarred, broken soldier, hiding in a garbage heap, with a name he barely recognized and a past that felt like a horror story. Izuku, he whispered, the name feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. He tried again, louder. Izuku Midoriya. The name had no power. It was just a sound. It didn't feel like him. But then, what did? Delta was a cage he had just escaped. He looked at his hands. He could feel the unnerving density of the adamantium in his bones. He extended his fingers, and with a soft snicked 10-inch claws of gleaming, indestructible metal slid from the back of each hand, passing through the skin without drawing blood, a grotesque and seamless integration of flesh and weapon. They had been a part of him for so long that he had forgotten they weren't natural. He stared at the lethal claws, the reflection of the dim light outside glinting off their razor edges. These were the tools that had made him a monster. These were what had separated him from the boy who dreamed and the weapon that killed. A wave of self-loathing, so pure and potent it was physically nauseating, washed over him. He was a freak. A monster built in a lab. A walking violation of everything that hero, that symbol, stood for. With a raw, choked cry of anguish, he slammed his fist into the corrugated metal wall of the container. The wall didn't just dent. It exploded outward. His adamantium-laced knuckles, combined with the sharpened claws, ripped through the rusted steel as if it were wet cardboard, leaving a gaping, jagged hole. He stared at the destruction he had wrought, his breathing ragged. The power was effortless. Terrifying. He was a weapon. It was in his very bones. He couldn't escape what he was. Exhausted, broken, and utterly lost, he retracted the claws and slid down to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest in a posture that was wholly Izuku Midoriya's. He was just a boy again, small and afraid, hiding from a world that had turned him into a monster he no longer wanted to be. And as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the junk mountains, casting long shadows across the beach, he finally succumbed to the mental and emotional exhaustion. He fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep, unaware that the hunt for the consortium's broken toy had already begun. And the thing they had sent to find him did not need to see, only to smell.